we're going to invite our panellists to come up. So Sharon Jackson, Managing Director of Carlton CSR. We have Lord Michael Hastings and Janet Blake, Head of Global CSR for British Telecom. So if they want to come up, I'll take one quick question to Linda, and then I'm going to let Linda run the panel discussion. So we got a question? Must have answered them all, eh? Okay, there's going to be plenty of time for discussion then and questions for the panel. So, Linda, I'm going to throw to you, and I think you're going to kick this one off. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. We're actually going to move into a panel discussion, but first we're going to start off with 5 minutes, as we did in the last panel discussion. 5 minutes from Sharon, Janet and Lord Hastings. And so I'm just going to give each of them the floor for 5 minutes. Then I'm actually going to ask each one of them a question, and then which they can answer or duck. And then, and you know I'm good at questions. And then I'm going to throw open to the floor. So to start with, Sharon, would you like to start talking about embedding?
Why not? Am I speaking from here?
Can
you all hear me?
Yes.
I'm standing up, but you can't? It's unusual for me. Usually everyone can hear my voice. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I have 5 minutes to talk about embedding corporate responsibility in organisations. And of course I've got to start with the references made earlier on to my work with Mission Australia, haven't I? Can't leave all those comments there. The first thing I have to say is this is an evolutionary process. I've been saying all week that we're still at the beginning of understanding how to embed these issues across a vast range of organisations. And I have to say, my view is, don't knock it. If an organisation really is trying, with sincerity, to actually implement sincere, robust, responsible business practices, don't knock it. Support and celebrate. And the work, certainly within Mission Australia, I know is absolutely real and robust. Eva made a... Is Eva still here? Oh, shame. Okay. Eva made a comment, don't do it to milk the corporates. I agree. We all agree. All of us work on the sustainability project at Mission Australia. Corporate partnerships, though, for NGOs are absolutely a reality. That is the world in which we work now. The relationships between businesses and charities are an absolute reality. So we can't avoid that. But that is only one aspect of something like a sustainability project, a responsible business project, embedded in an organisation. For sure, if it were just to get more bucks out of a business, that wouldn't be embedded, would it? That would be a bolt-on attitude. The other thing is, it was mentioned that a charity shouldn't be like a corporate. Well, a large charity, a large NGO, is very often like a corporate. For sure that the legal structure is different, but most of it's exactly the same. It employs people, it delivers a service, an outcome, it has HR departments, has procurement departments. There's a lot that's actually very similar. Would you all agree? Yes. So we've been talking about the benefits of responsible business as being a positive business strategy, a positive organisational strategy for the health of the organisation. So why should we exclude NGOs and charities? If this is a fantastic strategy, why should we say, hey, charity, you can't do this because you're not a corporate? So I have an issue around that. We've talked about all the benefits of engaging in responsible business, better partnership criterion, ethical decision-making. Eva made a very good point. What will you do when the chips are down when you're asked this situation with the government in terms of employment practices? Well, if an organisation like Mission Australia hasn't entertained a robust introspection and benchmarking process that we are doing now, they might not necessarily know what that ethical dilemma looks like. But with the framework, with the introspection, it makes those difficult questions so much easier for the whole organisation. Even in terms of partnerships, the questions about do you take money from the alcohol and the tobacco industries? Huge dilemma for many charities, because they're the organisations that have a lot of money to give away. If you haven't gone through as a charity or an NGO the process of knowing where the values of the organisation are in terms of those partnerships, how can you expect there to be a consistent view across the organisation? So Sorry Eva's not here, because I'd like to have been able to say those few things. Okay, so that's my general view in terms of, yes, of course we can apply robust measuring and benchmarking across NGOs and charities. Why on earth not? Just because a charity is doing great works in one sector doesn't mean it shouldn't also look at its impact in other sectors. So the environmental charities, hey, let's have a look at the community aspect. The community charities, hey, look at the environmental impact. Why on earth not, I say. So this is about how to embed. So I thought maybe I could talk to you a little bit about how we've approached it at Mission Australia. And the first thing is, Eric showed you a slide of 7 steps that we're using. In fact, those 7 steps are David Grayson and Adrian Hodges of this book, Corporate Social Opportunity, which I believe that you can buy throughout the conference, and also in his very first book, Everybody's Business, which is an excellent book as well. And for sure, we've used those 7 steps of implementation. Very simple, very practical, very common sense in terms of a healthy organisation. This is all about healthy organisations, long-term health for the survival of the organisation. So we've used those 7 steps, and also in conjunction with the Corporate Responsibility Index. And I think the problem earlier on, Corporate Responsibility Index, how does that apply to a charity like Mission Australia? Okay, it happens to be the index that businesses are using in Australia at the moment, so it makes sense to have some conformity. The hope is that later on we might start to adjust that and start actually looking at a responsibility index around the charities. Because I think you might all agree there's a lot of call for accountability in charities in Australia and also in Europe, I have to say. So how did we start? We started with engaging the top. This is all what we've been talking about for days now. Well, we started deciding what the drivers and the triggers were for a large charity, 3,000 people, Eric told you, across Australia. Why would a charity like that start to engage in these issues? We looked at all the effects and the impacts and the drivers on that very large charity and decided this was absolutely the right process for them. So we very clearly defined the drivers and the triggers so we can communicate them across the whole organisation and to all of the stakeholders. We then engaged the top 25 people of the whole organisation on board so that they completely understood and were supporting the initiative. We then arranged a steering group of champions to then communicate across the organisation. I have travelled around Australia talking to most of the people across the organisation at all the different states. And I have to tell you, it's been unresounding. This is a fantastic project for us, the people. We love Mission Australia. We also have values at home around other issues, and we want to bring our values to work. We did that. We talked to all the people. We also looked at the existing processes and procedures across the organisation, because my remit was that anything around this project must not add resource, costing, or take people away from their existing work stream. This is a very busy charity with limited funds, like most are, and we've managed to do that. We've looked at what have we already got. We've bolted on. That's not the right word. We've, sorry David, not bolted on. We've integrated our processes through existing streams and vehicles within the organisation. We've looked at KPIs across the organisation. We've involved HR. We've involved procurement. Procurement are so excited about this project. They are sourcing fair trade coffees, fair trade teas, all those things. Fantastic to involve them all. We've also made sure that we have verbalised the values plus the business case. To me, at the end of the day, how do we embed? It must be values of the business, the organisation, and the people. Look at the alignment. If the manager's values do not align with the business, there could be a problem there. There need to be some tough decisions, tough questions. Also the business case, got to have both. Simon mentioned earlier on, Simon Longstaff when he was here, the Corporate Responsibility Index measures and rewards integration, culture and strategy. Absolutely, that's how you embed. It's not just doing the bolt-on frilly bits that get you more corporate sponsorship or corporate partnerships, it's about integrating to the strategy, and that's why we've chosen this index. Thank you.
Sorry, Janet Blake.
Okay, thank you, and I hope my microphone's working. Well, I guess you heard me talk for an hour yesterday around this similar topic, so I'm going to probably do 2 things in this next 5 minutes. One is a quick recap of the key learning points that I took you through yesterday, just to try and refresh you on where the practitioner's view, if you like, of embedding CSR. But secondly, I like to pick up on a couple of areas that I only sketched over very quickly and just give you a little bit more detail on those. So first off, the quick refresh from yesterday. Really BT's experience of embedding CSR started with that compelling business case that we really could demonstrate what the bottom line revenue impact and benefits were of good CSR. Secondly was having a strong senior champion, in our case our chairman, who really could embody and deliver on the CSR actions. Thirdly was having a good governance structure in the organisation. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. We also talked about stakeholder panels, engaging with stakeholders and understanding what their requirements are on an ongoing basis, not just a one-off but a regular dialogue. We also talked about a concrete programme of actions, bringing it alive through things that you can really talk about and engage with your key stakeholders on. A clear set of targets and objectives, and I showed you very quickly the KPIs that we use, 12 of them. We haven't gone into a massive number, we've kept it short and sweet. Making those KPIs accountable by also demonstrating where we haven't met them, and you'll see in our report there are 2 areas that we haven't met our targets this year, which we've been quite open about. And finally, communicating very clearly what CSR actions and deliverables are all about. So that's a very quick refresh. Now just diving into a couple of the areas that I skimmed over fairly quickly yesterday. One of them is to pick up that governance point. It relates actually, Linda, to something that you mentioned earlier. And it's some experience we've found of managing CSR in a global context. Remember back to that world map I showed you around what different countries expect of a corporate and some of the big differences on focus areas. What we've now started to do is engage different stakeholder groups in different countries to try and understand what they require locally. But in order to make that real in terms of activities, what we found has worked for us is a matrixed steering group to deliver CSR activities internally. Now, what I mean by that is representatives from both business units, which is the vertical reporting line of actions and operations within the business, but also the horizontal cut, which is about how things are delivered in country. Because in order to make it really stick, you've got to get that working right. You've got to get the business drivers, if you like, the profit and loss drivers of the vertical units fitting with what the local in-country employee-based stakeholders and customers require. So having that conjoined steering group we found has worked for us. The very final point I'd like to make is just around health checks. This is another way that we've tried to really engage the business on what kind of CSR activities are going on, what's good and what's not so good, and what we need to do about it. And what we've done is chosen the top 10 or so change programs that are going on in any one year. And we've had a detailed conversation with that program director around what the CSR risks and opportunities are of that program. So it absolutely gets it into the mindset, into the frame of reference, and even into the language of that program director. Catches his attention, but brings it into very real terms. And that's another final thought really to leave you with around how to get engagement.
Thanks, Janet. Lord Hastings.
Well, it's very difficult to actually add anything to the brilliance that we've had from Sharon and Janet, because they've both dealt with the hard substance. I just wanted to pick on one dimension of it and expand on it slightly more. And actually it relates to one of British Telecom's values, which is heart, which Janet was mentioning yesterday. Because I'm convinced that embedding corporate responsibility into an organisation, I think of the BBC as a model, but many others I know about, which is that it has to go beyond the issues of process. The process issues are in some ways structurally relatively easy to do, because they will very often relate to competitiveness, and they will often relate to efficiency and effectiveness. So those are process business issues. The heart questions are not so necessarily easy to do, and And the heart thing is really associated with inspiration. Certainly in a media organisation, but not just, I mean, any kind of creative organisation where the primary assets are in ideas, and that would apply to any organisation in technologies as well. If the primary assets are ideas rather than tangibles, what you want is to liberate people's imagination. And you can only liberate imagination by two things. One is inspiring them to be free, but then giving them the space to do things which are going to be pretty out of the ordinary and see whether it delivers a better result. And the policy we've adopted in the BBC towards this is to construct all of our program-related campaigns with external partners. So to give you an example, just a few weeks ago, we launched a campaign called RAW, Reading and Writing, which is an education campaign run across the BBC's main television and radio airwaves. And the RAW campaign is intended to assist the 6 million adults in the UK who have particularly acute and poor reading and writing skills, to enhance those skills by both listening to programs and also using the web. Now, to achieve the best result for doing that, it was necessary to partner with the Libraries Service in the UK. And the Libraries Service are running the partnership program, are running the campaign in association with the BBC. Now, to do that is taking a risk, because in a way you're handing over the intellectual capital of what you're doing to somebody else. And many people would be dismissive of libraries having necessarily the same relevance as a broadcaster would have. The attitude we took to it was, well, actually, libraries have that kind of immediacy of location, physical presence, kind of trusted and ingrained into local communities, and a place where people feel safe. So we want that kind of inspirational dimension to this program campaign to engage them so that they get the real social value out of it at the same time. Now, again, that's one of those things that you can't necessarily measure. You could say, well, how many libraries have we got working for us? That's not the point. The point is, do the libraries love doing it? And if they love doing it, the inspiration point, then of course you get the real bang for the buck. So you've embedded the principle within the organization and got the organization to give it away to somebody else. So I just sort of add to the other 2 points, the whole point about heart as being not so much process, but inspiration.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Lord Hastings. I couldn't agree more. CSR is not about outputs, it's about outcomes, and that is very, very different in any society. I have 3 questions. I might start with you, Lord Hastings, seeing as you were the last speaker, but we all know that ethics and journalism is actually central to independence of reporting, etc., etc. In fact, in Australia, journalists in Australia, I don't know if you've caught up with it, but are very concerned because with the new terrorism laws we have in Australia, sedition is back on the agenda, and by the end of this year we will have the ability for sedition charges to be brought against journalists, or the fear is against journalists for inciting. And so, journalistic independence and the ethics of a balanced story is very, very important. But we all know that that actually can be used in another way by governments. And in particular, I am very interested in the way in which the BBC may have dealt with embedded journalism in Iraq, and the way that did appear to give an unbalanced view of what was going on.
The BBC was not alone in having embedded journalists, of course. They were from every country on the map of the earth, but, well, certainly those who had a broadcast presence. I think the value of, I don't want to say too much about that, because it's actually not, in one sense, the word directly a CSR issue, but just a comment to make about it, which is that what embedded journalism gives is an immediacy that previously distance journalism didn't provide. What that has to be balanced with is commentary and analysis. And I think it'd be fair to say that the process of how the BBC approached the Iraq War and the coverage of the Iraq War and subsequent conflicts is that the immediacy of embedded presence is balanced out with analysis. And therefore you get a holistic process.
I actually think that embedded journalism is a CSR issue and in fact in Australia we saw a great example of it a few weeks ago when they had their first raid on terrorism suspects in Australia. There was embedded journalists, and it was clear that the whole thing had been pre-orchestrated, and I think that does affect the honesty that comes through and the way in which things are portrayed in the society, and governments can use it. So I think that is very much a CSR issue.
Well, I think we're in delicate territory here because one is about editorial judgment and the freedom of editors and those with the integrity of responsible journalism. That is quite, and that has to be operated within the values of an editorial organisation. That is quite different in a way from saying CSR covers the map of everything an organisation does. Because if that's the case, then the CEO is the head of CSR. Well, of course, in theory, that's also the case. So why have a team? Well, on and on you go. So I think you've got to be careful with a media organisation of crossing the boundary too far into the editorial dimension. It's got to be run on the basis of values, but it's not the same.
This is a question for Janet. Janet, actually, I think I've told you at the last organisation I was at, I actually used the BT Outsourcing Study as a great case example. And for people who haven't seen this, this is also free on the website. It's called Good Migrations, and it actually looked at a stakeholder dialogue process around outsourcing. We know that's a really hot topic in Australia. Without going into too much detail, Sharon, can you just give us a flavour of what that's... Oh, sorry, Janet, what that stakeholder dialogue program was, how good it was and influential?
Sure. I should preface this by saying I actually wasn't in this role at the time, so I didn't experience it firsthand, but I can talk a little around what it was all about. Just to give you some context, outsourcing is quite key for BT because well, outsourcing and offshoring, should I say, because what we do as part of our service to customers is take on board the full IT service for another organisation, look to rationalise it, make it more effective, and in some cases offshore some of the activities that are going on into centralised call centres. So it's absolutely a key issue for us. But on this particular activity, what we chose to do was to pull together, through an external organisation, Sustainability, UK-based organisation, and ask them on our behalf to talk with different stakeholders involved in an offshoring or geography change of jobs so that we had an independent view. And this was part of a series of white papers that we've supported and that are published, as Linda says, openly on the website. Now, in many cases, it's kind of high risk because what comes back from that process is not influenced by BT. So we kind of banner it with saying this isn't actually the BT view necessarily, but what we do is actually use that as part of our thinking and part of our own mindset in approaching offshoring going forward. And on this particular one, there were a number of different stakeholder groups talked to, including our own employees, including the unions that we work with in the UK, because one of the angles on this was around the shift of UK-based jobs overseas. And it's a little bit of a contradiction in terms of offshoring. If you think about a global organisation, what is actually offshoring? All it really is a shift of roles from one location to another location. But what came out of this particular report was around about 12 key learning points that really was saying CSR shouldn't be a blocker to offshoring per se. What it can do is offer an enabler for doing offshoring more responsibly. And there were 12 key learning points that came out of that. Top of the list was talk and work with, in a very open way, all the different stakeholder groups that are affected. I haven't got time to go into any more detail now, but please do take a look. It's on the website, the one that I talked to you about yesterday, bt.com/betterworld. You can just download it and have a read.
Yeah, it's actually a great document and I recommend it to people. Sharon, I actually might go to the floor because we're running out of time. So, and I think you went through the embedding issues very, very well. So any questions from the floor?
That was quick.
There's actually a question up the back, but
Benji Lee from Vox Bandicoot. There's been some really consistent sort of themes about embedding CSR around leadership, communication, governance, relationships. I just wanted to ask the panel their thoughts on good quality transformative education and training programs on issues such as sustainability to embed CSR within their organisational culture, within their supply chains, and I guess in the general community too. If someone like the BBC, there's a bit of a role there. If anyone could, address specifically education.
Are you? I'm not entirely clear. Are you asking what programs exist, or are there?
I guess just the importance you place on actual education and training within your organisations on these issues.
Very high importance, but the question is, how do you achieve it? And in our case, what we've chosen to do is to find a very large group of internal stakeholders who I have a regular, almost month-by-month email exchange with, and then a very regular series of 3 times a year, bringing those people together around a set of themes and issues and ideas, in order that we can keep this issue of enthusiasm, passion, inspiration, but also knowledge, understanding, detail, reporting, performance measurement process. Trying to balance those two things up so that you keep the light and the shade operating together. And formal training processes, generally speaking, don't tend to deal with that. It needs to come out of example, kind of going and seeing and visiting. I mean, one of the great things that business and the community in the UK has certainly done, really immensely valuable, is walking people through the physical environments where change is taking place, seeing things on the ground. That makes an enormous difference than just being told about it. So, we try to develop kind of visiting programs as well, which are quite distinct from just straightforward modular training, which has its place but is limited because it doesn't tend to inspire.
Shall I give you a view from BT? And again, it's as a sort of practitioner's view. I guess we try and cut this in various different ways, and I would support absolutely what Michael was saying about importance. It's absolutely important. But for us, it's about how you get the right message to the right people at the right time. And you can't do a sheep dip on this, in our view. You have to choose your moment. What we tend to do is tackle it in different ways, and I'll give you a couple of examples. One of which is through a business game, which is kind of a really fun, easy, I think it takes around 40 minutes or so to do this game. You can either do it online or you can do it as part of a team workshop, team development. And it's just a really simple way of putting yourself into the position of a CEO running a business and trying to balance all the different stakeholder requirements by having to make decisions, and you get a little score at the end of it. So it's really simple, really easy, but it's very engaging, and that's worked well for us. Another quick example is we're starting now with some of our community programs to lift leaders of the future and offer them development opportunities into the community directly. And it tends to be communities that are not their local communities. So, for example, we've got a new program in India called Lifelines, which is a joint program with Cisco that we run. And that's helping rural farmers to gain quick access through a sort of clever technology system to some of their agricultural and veterinary needs. Now, that's a start-up sort of seed corn program. And what we're doing is lifting leaders of the future in to spend some time on that program, to experience it firsthand and to take back the experience into their part of the business. And that's really powerful because it builds on what Michael was saying about first-hand experience, but it also embeds the thinking into the leaders of the future. So it's good.
Sharon, do you have
time? Well, I can comment on my position as Associate Faculty with Cranfield University. So, for example, what's happening in the business schools, certainly at Cranfield, is getting the CSR agenda, corporate responsibility, business in society, whatever you care to call it, completely embedded throughout the whole MBA programme, for example. So there's a vast move in European business schools to actually integrate that learning from the very early stages. And actually in In a commercial context, some of the work I do is actually with BHP Billiton through Cranfield University, and the training is absolutely vital from the point of induction of the new recruits, second-year graduate programs and third-year graduate programs, where we actually have managers from all around the world, all sites of BHP Billiton, and actually an intensive 2-week training period, actually asking them to consider the issues. The sustainability and the responsible business practice is the core thread. We talk about strategy, we talk about performance, but sustainability is the core thread through 2 weeks. And we look at espoused values, perceived values. We give them the ethical dilemmas in a mining context. So there are organisations like BHP Billiton that certainly are taking the training consistently, importantly, not just a one-off hit, but consistently. Is that helpful? Good.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that also that actually in Australia, in some companies, they actually call that type of training the sheep dip method, the carpet bombing method. And we're a little bit more aggressive. And but look, I'm going to give a free plug to someone who's sitting in the audience, Earthwatch. Penny Richards is sitting there. HSBC committed a very, very large amount of money to a global leadership program in sustainability, where their employees in leadership training actually go out and work for 2 weeks with scientists on sustainability research projects. It teaches them stakeholder dialogue, it teaches them systems thinking, it teaches them about cause and effect in a very, very live, fluid environment. And then when those people come back, they have to develop a program in their local communities that will achieve change in that community. So that type of real program is an excellent opportunity. I have tried several times to get that program up with Australian banks, and I still think from the people I wanted to send on it were the credit risk managers. This is absolutely fundamental to every time they make a credit decision about lending to a company, to an industry of some sort. So there are those other programs out there. So free plug, Penny. Okay, we have one more question down here, and we do still have time for other questions before the next speaker. So I'm sorry.
Thank you, Linda. I have a question about, we've spoken a lot about corporates struggling with these sorts of evolutionary changes while we've been here. But there's another side of it, and that's the NGOs struggling. My personal experience has been that they're actually blocking a lot of initiatives that would gain them value, money and extra services for their clients, because they think this is a fad, because they think if they learn the language, they can put a grant application in and perhaps they'll get money back to service their clients. And there appears to be quite a gap with the communication that's going on to the non-profit sector. Now, I'm seeing you shake your head. I'm talking about specific examples that I experienced in Victoria as those changes were going through. And I am still getting constant dialogue back from NGOs that this is a fad or a ploy, or you just need to learn the language, but it's not really real. So when we talk about the corporates struggling and needing some assistance, I think that the NGOs and their place in this also needs to be considered and assistance go through to those NGOs. Does anybody want to comment on that and talk about any communication strategies that you would think would be appropriate?
I think the only comment I could make, I mean, I don't know enough about the situations you're talking about, but the only comment I would make is all organisations need help and support. Corporates, NGOs, the lot. Everyone is going through a term of evolution. We've gone from the awareness, the intent, to the tactical, and now suddenly there's a plethora of businesses and NGOs looking at strategic implementation. Everyone is in place of evolution. And at the moment, whilst we have this wonderful, I think, innovative, creative, competitive advantage opportunity, because there isn't legislation, it will stay very fluid. And one of the things we're talking about is embedding. That was the word we keep using. Now, I have a problem with the word embedding because it sounds like your feet are stuck in concrete. I mean, never should you move. Actually, this is living. It's growing and living. And anything that's living and growing creates more questions than it gives answers, usually. So I think you raise an important point. Everyone needs help and support. And the more collaboration in industry sectors, including NGOs, the better.
Can I just add one additional point to that? And again, it's not my sort of specialist area either, but again, from a corporate viewpoint, I guess we see the key benefit and the win-win for both an NGO and a corporate in this kind of situation where the world is changing so fast. We're all trying to find, the right way forward. It's about forming strategic partnerships on a long-term basis so you can grow together and really work out together how to continue to keep it a win-win. And if you like, I'm sitting on the other side where a lot of NGOs are coming to me and asking for cash. And I kind of sit there having to make a decision, and ultimately I've got to decide on what's in the long-term interest of BT in my case. And it's always where there is a strategic partnership that's very clear, or that we feel we share enough value and culture with that organisation that we can work on it together. So that's kind of where I see, the best sort of success factors coming out.
Yeah. Question here.
Michael McGarvey from Holding Redlich Solicitors in Melbourne. I'd like to ask the panel a question that may also be relevant to Linda and her presentation before, because it touches on the issues relating to Westpac. And Linda referred to the fact that there are some companies, such as Guns, you referred to, and James Hardie, where the performance doesn't match the feeling in the gut from observers of that company about how they're managing. What would the panel do with a company like a major bank that has very successfully won a significant sustainability index in Australia in 2004, yet I think many observers of that company would still feel an awkward feeling about that company's CSR performance in their heart or in their gut. How would you tackle the problem that is presented to the next CSR consultant in, for example, a Westpac or a Guns or a James Hardie that happens to win one of the sustainability indexes?
Linda, what do you think?
Well, one, Noel Purcell will be here tomorrow in the reporting session, and I think that is a great question. But perhaps, in fact, it's a question for David Grayson.
Welcome to our panel.
Who isn't even on the
Great
panel.
question for Noel Purcell. No, I think we've confronted this issue in the UK with the decision last year to make Marks & Spencer Company of the Year at a time when Marks & Spencer, one of our very long-standing retailers, found a member of business in the community and so on, was certainly going through the commercial doldrums and was the subject of a hostile takeover bid from a very, very entrepreneurial character, a man called Phil Green, whose views of the priority for different stakeholders would certainly be very different to those of Marks & Spencer, which he was contesting. So specifically, he would be placing much more priority in terms of customers wanting low prices, etc., rather than some of the traditional supplier relationships and some of those kinds of issues. It's a similar question you see now with Walmart, in terms of Walmart having, from being not at all interested in many of these issues of corporate responsibility, suddenly embracing corporate responsibility, committing themselves to responsibility reporting and so on, and yet many still saying, look, there seems to be a big inconsistency between those kind of commitments and their focus on keeping prices low for their consumers, very often some would argue against the interests of local communities in terms of the diversified retail sector and so on. I think it comes back to some of the things we've been repeatedly saying during the course of the last 2 days, that anyone who thinks that this is all a very straightforward, one-dimensional picture is missing it, because a lot of the issues where we're really having taken some of the low-hanging fruit in many companies, we're now on some of the much more serious dilemmas in terms of reconciling interests of stakeholders, which are very, very different.
Yep, thanks, David. I shouldn't duck the whole question. I was at Westpac for 2 years. And I think that, I think your question in the end was, as a consultant going into these organisations, how would you approach it? And I think the first thing you would do is take a deep breath. And I think you've got to take in facts. You have to take in a very, very strong competitive analysis of what your competitors are now doing. And you need to ask them to look very, very seriously at their employee engagement. I can't tell you what a strong point it is. Your employees will be the first ones to say, in a very public way, this is rhetoric, because they will be the first ones who become dissatisfied. Westpac actually, all credit to them, lifted the bar, but from a very low base in Australia in 2001. And it was at a time when no one really knew what corporate social responsibility for a bank looked like. It hadn't even been defined in Australia. We just knew a whole lot of people were unhappy. But that bar has been raised considerably, especially some of the global banks are just doing the most amazing things. And so whether or not they deserve to continue to get that kudos, you do have to look at, well, what did it start in the industry? And so you do have to say, okay, maybe I don't feel comfortable about it, but in actual fact, we now have a whole of industry response instead of just one company. That has been good, and I think you do have to sort of weigh that up. But basically, if I was a consultant walking into Guns Limited, I would be taking a deep breath.
Sorry, Linda, just to add to the Westpac question, this is another loaded question, but what does it do for our faith in CSR index that allows a major tobacco company to be held up as a shining light?
Okay, I actually think we should all question those indices, and let me tell you, I filled in enough of them and had them in CEO scorecards, which is not the way to go. If anyone's considering that, don't do that. Those indices are an important they're important, but they're misused. They're an important analytical tool for the organisation. But some people don't understand that the Dow Jones Sustainability is best of sector. It is not best company. So in terms of tobacco companies, I'm sorry, but British American Tobacco are the best in terms of tobacco companies. And that is a very subtle difference that people actually don't understand. And because when you look at all of the leaders in the Dow Jones, you can't compare them because they have different industry weightings. And but when you get indices like reputation measurement and CRI in Australia, where they actually do purport to measure cross industries, I think that's very difficult. And I wish ordinary analysts would, people who are really and truly buy and sell analysts would do a lot more of this work so that those indices could have more credibility.
Thank you very much, Linda. We're going to bring the panel session to a close. I want you to thank Linda, Sharon, Lord Hastings and Janet. Thank you very much.